Happiness and money? Part 1. Money is no guarantee of happiness, but the freedom it gives certainly is. Throughout my childhood, I grew up in a family that barely made ends meet. We didn't always have enough money even for food, and this didn't add to my happiness, but rather brought constant stress. Now I'm 35, I work in IT, and my income is about $120,000 a year. The transition from a life of constant need to financial stability has radically changed my perception of life. I didn't become happier by default, but I gained the freedom of choice. To relax, spend time with loved ones, travel. I no longer wake up in a cold sweat, thinking about bills. The freedom that comes with money brings a certain happiness. Just big numbers on the account are not about happiness. My colleague, whom I consider a true friend, makes twice as much as me, about $250,000 a year. She bought herself a huge house, a Tesla, and lives what seems like a luxurious lifestyle. But you know what? She is absolutely unhappy. She works 60 to 70 hours a week, her marriage fell apart, and she is constantly stressed. I make much less, $75,000, and live in a small apartment. But I have time to pursue hobbies, spend time with my family, and travel. When I look at her, I understand that money does not always make you happier. It just allows you to buy more, but this more is not necessarily what you need to be happy. Student years and $60,000 in debt. Not the happiest of times. I graduated with $60,000 in debt, and at first it felt like a ton of bricks. It felt like this debt was a huge black hole that would haunt me forever. I ended up working 2 jobs, barely getting any sleep, and honestly, I wasn't happy. Luckily, after 10 years of working, I finally paid off all my debt and felt something close to happiness for the first time. I think it wasn't the money itself, but the lack of that financial burden that allowed me to finally enjoy life. Rich neighbors do not mean happy neighbors. I live in a small suburb, and my neighbors, with whom I communicate closely, are quite wealthy people. They have huge houses, swimming pools, and $100,000 cars. It would seem that what else could you want for happiness? But their families, oddly enough, do not seem happy. One of the neighbors even told me once that all these things are just an attempt to compensate for the feeling of emptiness. He made a lot of money in the stock market, but in the end, he lost contact with his children and wife. It made me think, what do I spend my money on, and will it lead to the same thing? My happiness came when I had a $500 bank balance and no obligations. After graduating, I went on a trip around the U.S. with a backpack and $500 in the bank. I had no job, no debt, and, those were the happiest months of my life. I lived in a tent, talked to strangers, ate cheap sandwiches. Of course, it was a temporary period, and you can't live like that for the rest of your life. But this experience showed me that happiness is not in money, but in freedom and the absence of pressure. Money is important, of course, but it will never make you truly happy if you don't know what brings you joy. My pension and peace of mind are where I found happiness. I'm 65 now, and I'm finally retired. I've never been rich, but I've saved a little bit, contributed to a 401k, and by the time I retire, I had about $500,000. That money doesn't make me super rich, but it does give me security and freedom. I can spend more time with my grandchildren and not worry about being poor when I'm old. Happiness for me now is peace of mind and a lack of stress, and money has helped me achieve that. It's not a luxurious life, just a normal, calm existence. Happiness is being able to live the life you want without constant stress. My father was happy, even though we had nothing. My father worked in a factory, earned about $40,000 a year, and always seemed to me the happiest man in the world. We were not rich. Sometimes we had to save on things we wanted, not on things we needed. But his joy was in spending time with us, his children. We played football in the evenings, watched old movies together, and went fishing. I think happiness is not in having all the material goods, but in how you spend your time and with whom. Of course, money makes life easier, but I would rather remember my father's laughter than golden toys. My $40,000 salary and the support of my friends made me happy. My first real experience of happiness after starting to live on my own was not only about money, but also about social support. During my college years, I started working part-time and was making about $20,000 a year. When I graduated, my salary increased to $40,000, which was enough to pay for rent and basic needs. But the real happiness for me was moving to the city where my best friends lived. We often had parties, helped each other out during difficult times. When you feel part of a community and know that there are people you can lean on, money becomes less important for happiness. Money was everything when I was a kid, but now I value other things. I grew up poor, and we didn't always have enough money to buy new school books. At age 10, I remember feeling ashamed because my backpack was old and torn while other kids had new and beautiful ones. At school, it seemed like happiness came from the things I didn't have. But now that I'm 30, I've realized that the things I wanted so badly as a child were just temporary status symbols. I now make about $90,000 a year, and while I can afford expensive things, I found happiness and stability in relationships, not in material possessions. My neighbor wins more, but looks unhappy. I have a neighbor who is a lawyer and wins about $300,000 a year. While I work as a teacher and earn $55,000, our lifestyle is different, and I have always noticed that he tries to look successful and happy. But not long ago we talked, and he confessed that his huge income does not bring him happiness because every day he comes home exhausted and disappointed. He is always under pressure from clients and court cases, and even his luxurious house cannot compensate for the lack of joy in life. At that moment, I realized that my evenings when I come home and just play chess with my daughter bring me much more happiness than any bank account. A friend with a mortgage and me with rent. Who is happier? My best friend recently bought a house and took out a 30-year mortgage. And while she's happy to have her own place, I've noticed that she's constantly stressed about the payments. I, on the other hand, am still renting, and while that doesn't make me an owner, it does make me less stressed. I make about $65,000, which is enough to cover rent and the little things in life like traveling and eating out. Sometimes I see my friend stressing about her mortgage, especially when interest rates change, and I think I'm happier in my current situation, even if I don't own a home. A career in a startup and the loss of the meaning of life. After college, I got a job at a startup that promised me the moon. The pay was good, $80,000 a year plus stock options. I quickly became hooked on that life. Working 70 hours a week, the promise of an IPO, meeting with investors. But at some point, I felt like I was losing the point of this race for money. Yes, the pay was growing, but at some point I realized that I had neither the time nor the energy to enjoy life. So I changed my job to a less stressful one, and now I earn $60,000. But I have time for hiking, hobbies, and meeting with friends. And now I'm much happier. Money for children's education is real happiness. When I had children, I decided to save money for their education. My wife and I are not rich. Our combined income is about $100,000 a year, but we try to save as much as possible and invest in our children's education. We were recently able to open 529 plans for both of our children, and this was a real treat. I feel like these savings will provide for their future and allow them to go to school without the debt that I once carried with me. It makes me happy to know that my children will be able to start their adult lives from a better place than I ever did. Investing in charity has proven to be a great source of happiness. When I started making over $100,000 a year, I realized that I wanted to use some of that money to help others. My neighbor worked for a local charity, and he invited me to attend an event. Since then, I have been donating part of my salary to a charity that helps needy families, and honestly, it gives me much more satisfaction than buying a new gadget or a vacation. Seeing my money actually help someone through a tough time is what gives me real happiness. Money itself means little, but how you use it makes a huge difference. The struggle for promotion and the realization that happiness was already close by. At my job, I was working hard to get a promotion that I thought would make me happy. I work in the financial sector and started out making $70,000, but I spent 5 years working overtime trying to get to $120,000. When I finally got that promotion, something strange happened. I realized that I hadn't changed much. Yes, I had more money and I could afford a nicer car and travel more. But the happiest moment in all those years was actually the minute my wife and I would just sit in the kitchen, drink coffee, and laugh at old photos. Money made our lives more comfortable, but happiness came from those simple, honest moments that money couldn't buy. More money, less time, a lesson from parents. My parents worked 2 jobs to give me a better future. They made about $90,000 a year together, but they hardly saw each other and rarely had time for family. I remember wishing they were home when I got home from school or could come to my school events. Even though they provided for us, we did not have real family moments. Today, I try to work no more than 40 hours a week. Even though my income is not that high, $55,000 a year. I have time to be with my family, play with my children, and enjoy every moment. I think this is the most important thing I took away from their experience. losing a job, and real happiness in the support of a wife. A couple of years ago, I lost my job, and it was the scariest time of my life. I was making about $85,000, and I was the main breadwinner. When I got laid off, I was completely lost and worried that I wouldn't be able to support my family. But my wife surprised me. Instead of panicking, she supported me morally, started working at her old job, and showed me that we could do it. I realized that money is important, of course, but the real value is the relationships and support we have with each other. We have since pulled through, and I have found a new job, but this experience has shown me that happiness is far from just about money. The desire to own things turned into emptiness. When I started making serious money, more than $150,000 a year, I suddenly found myself trapped in consumerism. I bought myself expensive clothes, luxury gadgets, cars, even a membership to an elite gym. It seemed like this would make me happy, but the more I bought, the more empty I felt. I realized that these things gave me temporary pleasure, not deep satisfaction. True happiness came when I sold some of my things, moved to a simpler home, and began volunteering. These small acts of helping others filled my life with meaning, and I realized that happiness is not in quantity, but in the quality of the days I live. My marriage was destroyed by the pursuit of money. Working in real estate, I was making quite a lot of money, about $200,000 a year. My wife and I were living in a luxurious house, vacationing at the best resorts and buying everything we wanted. But at some point, I realized that I had practically lost my wife. We stopped communicating, our relationship became cold, and eventually she left. I was so busy making money that I didn't notice that our happiness was fading. After the divorce, I realized that happiness lies in intimacy and time spent together, not in the amount of money in the bank. It was a painful but important lesson. My father taught me that happiness is independence. My father always told me that happiness is being able to do what you want, when you want. He worked as a mechanic and didn't make much money, about $50,000 a year. But he lived the way he wanted. He saved money, and we always had a small fund for a rainy day, thanks to which we never got into debt. That's where I saw his happiness, in independence. Today, I try to live by the same principles. I work for a small company, earn $70,000, but I don't take out loans and don't live in debt. Being debt-free and financially stable makes me happy. A dream to start your own business and an unexpected path to happiness. I always dreamed of opening my own cafe. I waited tables for many years, saved every dollar, and eventually saved about $30,000, which was enough to start my own small business. When the cafe opened, I thought it would make me really happy. But it turned out that business requires much more time and resources than I imagined. I worked 80 hours a week, hardly saw my family, and even began to get sick from constant stress. In the end, I sold the cafe, went back to work with regular hours, and felt a real relief. Now I have more time for my wife and children, and I am happy that I can just enjoy life without endless worries.